All right, well, good day, everyone. Thank you for joining me and the NGC board on this last day of October to learn more about the newly forming 501c3 National Geospatial Collaborative. My name is Lindsay Pena, and I'm NSGIC's Director of Grant Administration and the lead staff for NGC. We also have the NGC board on the call with us today, who I will introduce during the presentation. But we wanted to welcome you all. And again, thank you for joining us today, and we're happy to have you to learn more about NGC, its founding, its function, and its current developments. So no tricks today, hopefully only treats on this Halloween day for you all. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping. So all participants have entered the call on mute. This presentation is being recorded, and we will post it to the NGC webpage that's located on the NSGIC website. And it will also be added to the NSGIC knowledge base for future viewing. There will be time for Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please put your questions in the chat box at any time throughout the presentation, and we will review those and address the questions at the end of the session, as well as capture the questions and answers for our ongoing FAQ document that will also be posted on the NGC page on the NSGIC website. So for those of you that were able to attend the NSGIC Annual Conference in New Orleans, this is a recap of the presentation that we did at the 8:30 a.m. session on Thursday, September 28th. While the session was well attended, since we realized that not all of our NSGIC members are able to attend the NSGIC conferences, NSGIC leadership and the NGC board wanted to host this webinar about NGC so that all NSGIC members had an opportunity to learn more about NGC and ask any questions. So with all that said, I'm going to start the actual presentation and begin with the basics. So what is NGC? So the National Geospatial Collaborative is a newly forming, soon-to-be IRS-designated 501c3 nonprofit entity registered in the state of Texas. The formation of NGC was initiated by the Board of Directors of NSGIC, which is an IRS 501c6 organization. So what does that all mean? Well, for those of you that may not be versed in tax IRS designation, this next slide will break down some of those different comparisons. So to understand why NSGIC board initiated the founding of NGC, it's important to understand the differences between these two designations. So as a fun fact, there are currently 27 IRS 501c types of organizations. So your treat for today is that I will only be talking about these two. So this side-by-side comparison shows the differences between NSGIC, which is a C6, and NGC, which is going to be formed as a C3. So I'm going to start with looking at the NSGIC side, because in looking at NSGIC as a C6, this is going to take us all the way back to NSGIC's original founding and why it determined to set up a C6. So from the onset, advocacy has been a main focus with NSGIC, and many of the early conferences, for those of you that might have been long-term members, were actually held close to DC, so members could participate in Hill meetings and basically advocate for states and geospatial initiatives. So for NSGIC to form as a C6, this made sense with its missions and goals. However, as the organization has evolved over time, while this C6 status is still a beneficial status to have, there have been some missed opportunities, which I will expand upon a little bit later. But I'm going to go through this slide a little bit to give you an understanding of NSGIC and why we are moving to creating a new entity that will have close partnership and ties with NSGIC, so we can basically have the best of both worlds. So for NSGIC, it was set up as basically a member-focused organization. So its mission is not charitable. Its primary purpose is to promote the common interest of its memberships. And so That is why we have our specific membership structure set up, and there are membership fees in this, that are paid to be a part of this organization. So as a C6, NSGIC can participate in unlimited lobbying. Donations received from individuals or other entities are not considered tax deductible. And so what that means is that if someone came with $1 million to NSGIC, NSGIC would say, yes, I will take this, thank you very much. But that is all we can do. We cannot provide a tax receipt for that individual to take a tax deduction. And then as a C6, NSGIC can receive funds if the funder allows them to apply. And so that if the funder allows really becomes a critical component as we looked into increasing different opportunities. And so, we've talked about the C6, so let's talk a little bit about the C3. So NGC is basically being set up to where it will have a charitable and educational purpose, meaning that there are no specific members that we are, promoting interest of, rather than this organization has the opportunity to benefit the community. So there will be no members associated with this organization, as well as no membership fees. A C3 can advocate for causes within reason. However, it cannot influence legislation. So that's one of the biggest differences between these two types of organizations. As well as for a C3, donations are tax deductible and charitable. And so what that means is if someone came to NGC with $1 million, NGC would say, yes, thank you very much. We will take that $1 million. And we will also provide you with a tax deduction, that tax deductible receipt. And then with NGC, grants can be given and they can be received by the organization. And so this next slide basically goes through and shows you kind of the comparison from that last slide, but just in a more digestible format. So in creating a C3 along with the C6, if you kind of smush those two together, because the point and purpose is for both of these organizations to have strong ties and to have a strong partnership. And together, they basically will serve the best of both worlds, because what one organization might not be able to do, the other can, and vice versa. So why NGC? So this is what I like to call my Powerball slide. And at the time of the annual meeting, I think Powerball was up to its $969 million. And so, of course, Powerball is great. So with having these two different organizations, I look at it, it's like Powerball, but it has much better odds. And for my Powerball friends that are out there, we're only at 152 million. So play if you want. And if you do win, consider donating to NGC. That's my shameless plug. So I like to look at, these are different opportunities by having both organizations working together and by having both different types of structures. These are some of the benefits. So ultimately, different access. So going back to that last slide, C6, C3, they're able to do different things with those specific purposes. Creating NGC gives us an opportunity to extend the reach. So meaning right now, NSGIC is a state-led organization. So everything that we're focused on is for the benefits of the states. With NGC, there is a very strong tie to where we want to make sure we are focused on the states. However, it gives us the opportunity to where we're not just tied to the state-specific focus. We can move up to where we start looking at a national level, a national reach. And then we can also even drill down. So we can look at a particular state to a particular county, municipality, and drill down that way. So it just allows, again, more reach up and down, which as we're going up and down, we're always thinking about the state's best interest. We have the opportunity to increase capacity, meaning that with each of the different types of entities, there are different areas that, again, with C3 organizations, there are a lot of different opportunities for volunteering and processes to bring in, extra set of helping hands, which could help increase capacity in certain areas. And so that's, one of the benefits. Probably one of the biggest benefits is no missed opportunities. And this goes back into a little bit of history in terms of our current cooperative agreements and grants that we have run in the past. So many of you are very familiar with our Geo-enabled elections project, which we very much enjoyed. As a C6 organization, we were eligible for a certain amount of funding. However, had we had a C3 status at the time when that project was functioning, that would have opened doors to a lot of other potential funding opportunities to engage with, and to potentially to have kept that, have that continuation of that project was going. Because many of when the funding stopped from our primary funder, we didn't have anything where we could move forward to continue to sustain. Now, NSGIC has decided to, keep that project and initiative moving. However, with a C3 tie with NSGIC, there is that potential where we could approach some of the organizations that we had connections with in the past. With that, we now have this C3. And there were talks, back prior to when I was on, basically, where if you had a C3, we have the funds to give you. And so again, we don't want to miss any of those opportunities moving forward in the future. A next kind of bonus is to basically enhance knowledge sharing. So obviously with having, two different entities, there could be different partnerships, different relationships. And the more you are enhancing, individuals and input, the more it's just going to benefit the larger geospatial ecosystem. And then lastly, my Powerball, basically opens up outside support and opportunities. And so with having a C3, that opens up opportunities for funding with individuals, family foundation, corporate giving programs, and other opportunities that are open to a C3 entity that the C6 entity, does not have available to them. We wanted everybody to kind of have a background in terms of, NSGIC's role in the startup process. So as I mentioned, the C3 is a concept that is not new to NSGIC. So obviously when there were missed opportunities in the past, there have been internal discussions, throughout the years. When key staff was hired, so obviously in 2016, 2017, we brought in staff for NSGIC. And those individuals were looking into starting up a C3 at that time. Obviously we had a change in executive director when John Jordan came on board. I think one of the first things that he had mentioned is if we want to expand our grant project, we really need to, have staff that have that experience in finding the funding and working with, federal projects and whatnot. I came on board last year in 2022. And so, and kind of one of the first things that I jumped in and said was, have you ever thought of this? And I know it's been, talks in the process. So we're now at a point where, the board recognized that this is an area that we want to investigate and move forward. And so I provided the board of NSGIC a lot of information, prior to them deciding, in early of this year, we are going to approve an initiation of a C3. With that, the NSGIC board also basically determined the name. So they determined that it was going to be the National Geospatial Collaborative, or NGC. We selected the entity location in the state of Texas, as well as NSGIC had a hand in selecting the founding board members, and has committed to supporting the new C3 in its startup phase. And so I wanted to give everybody, again, background on, why did we determine the state of Texas? And so we went through and looked at, all of the different family foundations, corporate foundations, giving programs, and looked at where are there the most opportunities. Obviously there are federal grants and national grants, and, we would attack those as well, but we wanted to look at from an internal state standpoint, is there a better state to have our entity located. So we again looked at the number of foundations, and there were a couple of other states that were particularly selected in terms of Wisconsin is where NSGIC is incorporated. NSGIC's headquarters, excuse me, NSGIC's headquarters is in the state of South Carolina, so that's why we looked at it there. Delaware was brought up, and I actually went through, all 50 states in terms of how many grant foundations are available. And so with that, we came up with kind of the top numbers. California, New York, those were number 1 and number 2, and then Texas came in at number 3. And then again, we went through all of the 50 states. And then we decided, we, meaning the NSGIC board, decided that they wanted to have a state that has been very active within the NSGIC organization throughout the years. And so it was selected as Texas, because Texas has had a long history with NSGIC. And as many of you know, our current president is Richard Wade from the state of Texas. And so Texas was determined, the entity location. And I am also in Texas. And so I serve as the local registered agent that you have to have an individual on the ground in the state for your entity. So a little bit about the board founding as far as NGC. So the NSGIC board identified that its initial board should be consisted of 1 state member in good standing that was recommended by the executive committee, 1 business partner in good standing recommended by the corporate leadership committee, and then that the NSGIC past president would serve as the current NGC president. And so I know there were communications that went out asking NSGIC membership, for these different recommendations and whatnot. So with that, our initial founding board is presented here. So Jenna is at the time was the NSGIC past president. And so she became NGC's president. Tim Johnson and Sheila. Tim was selected from the state representatives, and Sheila was represented from the CLC. And then myself. So we were kind of the first 3, and then we realized we really need to have somebody with a good financial background, because there, are some funds that are needed within startup and needing to create an initial budget and whatnot. And so in June, we sent out to the NSGIC board a request for appointments or recommendations for a treasurer, and Mr. Dan Ross joined us in June. So this is the NGC founding board. And the founding board had a number of startup tasks, and we have basically been meeting just about every 2 weeks since, I want to say May, if I'm not mistaken, going over all of the initial startup tasks. So the board was in charge of determining the mission statements, creating the articles of incorporation, applying for Texas state nonprofit status, appointing that treasurer, going through the bylaws and policies and procedures, and making those documents that will be kind of historical reference and moving forward throughout the history of NGC. Again, a part of that bylaws was determining board composition, director eligibility, all of that for long-term sustainability and success of the organization. These last 3 are where we are currently still in process. So we have engaged with legal counsel to make sure that all of our bylaws are compatible with Texas law as well as IRS law. We are doing everything we can to make sure there's always going to be a continuous tie between NSGIC and NGC. But we also have to make sure that we're doing it in a legal capacity. And so, like I said, that's why we've spent the time and dedication to work on those bylaws, and that we are having legal counsel review to make sure that everything is compatible with Texas and IRS. And then our next step is to apply for the actual IRS status, and then really work on determining the focus and direction of the organization, as well as appointing additional board members, which all of those last 3 we are in process. And so the mission. So the mission of NGC. So the mission of National Geospatial Collaborative is to advance the understanding, use, and integration of geographic information systems and associated emerging technologies by supporting geospatial professionals, organizations, and initiative through collaborative research, education, knowledge sharing, and strategic partnerships. And so, again, we are still in that initial process. So this next slide gives some ideas and just a little sampling of potential future projects and initiatives. Oh, and my computer, there we go. Sorry about that. So on this slide, I basically broke down from the mission statement. We talked about collaborative research, we talked about education, knowledge sharing, and strategic partnerships. So as far as collaborative research, something that could potentially fall under here could be doing different pilot projects. It could be building on past wins and past projects. So, we already have a basis for doing geo-enabled elections, and we still have an initiative with NSGIC with that community. And so, again, we could reach out and potentially approach some of those foundations that support election-based initiatives. We have that history and be able to expand on those different projects. And then some of these ideas I put in here were specifically from the NSGIC conference when I sat in on a few different sessions hearing. I believe it was Erin from Montana was talking about how she helped support the need for her different initiatives by having some funds that were able to track mechanisms, to support how many callers are we getting and who's asking this. And so, different real world examples is what I was, incorporating into some of the potential ideas. Again, this is up to the board to determine and decide, and we are still developing. But, it's exciting as we're in this initial startup phase that these board members are the ones that are, starting to really lead and drive the future of NGC forward. So as far as education, looking at grant funding preparation support. And so this could be, with different states. I know we have different states at all different levels. We have some that have funding written into legislation. We have some, that don't. And we have some that have expertise and experience writing grants. And then we have some people in positions that don't. And so that could be something where NGC has a project where we're helping a state get basically funding ready. So let's get all your documents and support in line and make sure that if there is an opportunity that comes up, you're ready and prepared to, move forward with that opportunity and potentially have support, with the actual process of applying. We could potentially, I know one of the biggest challenges I've heard at the conference was working with non-technical people. And I think Alfredo from Connecticut was the one that explained this a little bit more to me, because I was thinking, oh, it's just someone that's not understanding of GIS. And he said, no, it's someone to where in this small little town, there's one computer and it's a volunteer, in their 70s or 80s, that is the one that is responsible for getting me at the state what I need, for reporting purposes and whatnot. And it's that type of, so for me, again, whole different perspective of what training non-technical people really means. And so, that could be projects where if this is what this particular state needs at this level to help facilitate, what they need to do at the top state level, there's potential funding where we can get the help that they need to make sure that their jobs are being done smoothly and effectively. Knowledge sharing. So talking points. I know there are a lot of states that have that are going into the legislations, and they're able to drive different initiatives and explain why is it important that you have, GIS and what are we really doing. And so basically, we could provide different talking points as well as scholarships. That's an area that as a nonprofit organization, we can give grants. And so if we we know it is important to get people to different conferences. So whether it is the NSGIC conference, or whether it is ESRI conference, or whether it is a state conference with GIS, I know a lot of different states have their own councils doing their own conferences as well. And getting people to those conferences is important. And I know a lot of times it's not necessarily built in a budget to get people there. So, potentially NGC could have a scholarship project where we are helping states get key people to these key conferences that would help benefit their roles and their jobs. And then strategic partnerships, again, is another area, and different types of projects we could potentially do, is looking at what our current partners need and how we can be useful. So again, at one of the conferences, a partner we were talking to was saying, sometimes at the federal level, we get a slew of money coming in at the very end, and I don't know how to distribute this. And if I don't spend the money, it'll be taken away from my next, budget. And we want to make sure that we are being, good stewards of federal funds. So we don't just want to give it to anyone just to spend it. We want to make sure it's going to the right place. And so again, it's looking at, if we can help states get to a level where if you had $1 or $1 million, and at the last minute, someone came in and said, I have this amount of money, how can I spend it? It would be very nice, on the state side to obviously get funds to do what you need to do. But then on our federal partner side, having a place where they can go if they have funds and they need to distribute, where it could be, these are different projects that we know are basically ready to go. And then looking at professional services, licenses, products. So again, with strategic partnerships, there's a lot of access that a C3 has in terms of the things that it's able to obtain with that C3 status. And so again, just another benefit with having kind of both organizations. So while they are separate organizations, so NGC is its own standalone entity. It is not, it's not a part of NSGIC. It does have its own board. While we are separate, we try to make ourselves incredibly linked. And so this slide just gives you, kind of a description of all of the ways that the organizations are tied together. And then again, as we're working through the bylaws, we're making sure, because in some questions, and again, we can go through some Q&A, but I know one of the biggest questions that has come up is how do we keep, one organization going rogue from another organization, because that's never the purpose or the intent. And so as we're setting up the entities, again, we're doing everything we can within IRS regulations and state of Texas regulations that we are, keeping those organizations separate as needed, but at the same time, where we are allowed to link and can have those links, we are making sure that we're doing so. So again, just stepping up, we're NSGIC initiated. The past president serves as the NSGIC current president. Our nominations for elections come from the NSGIC community. And I said elections, so we don't have elections, so excuse me there. But so our NGC nominations come from the NSGIC community, so we can appoint our new board members. The NGC president, which is the current NSGIC past president, sits on the executive NSGIC committee. And again, just linking. So we're trying to do every link that we can. We're including updates at the NSGIC leadership briefings. We're communicating as far as through, emails, newsletters, and then our executive director of NSGIC. And then as I'm the lead staff person with NGC, we're on continuous conversations as well and communication. So this just gives you a view of the board composition. And this is from the bylaws. So you saw the initial board, but the overall board moving forward will contain the one president, which is always going to be the NSGIC past president, and then 6 directors. And so these 6 directors will represent individuals that are nominated by the NSGIC Association. So that's through this, they can either be state representation, business partners, retired members, partner organization liaisons, or other industry professionals and organizations from the geospatial community. And the president and directors will have voting privileges. So as far as their terms, our NSGIC past president, they just have a one-year term because as the new, I think many of you are familiar with the way NSGIC is set up, to where they come as president-elect, then they serve president, and then go past president. So they will concurrently serve their past president NSGIC with current NGC president. We will have 6 directors total when we have a full board. They will have 2-year terms each, and they will be eligible for reappointment up to 3 consecutive terms. And so this is our NGC president term, succession. So Jenna started as our first president. Jonathan has now taken over after the NSGIC Annual, as he moved into the past president. And then you can see our future presidents coming up. So Richard Wade will serve as our president starting in 2024 after the NSGIC Annual Conference. And then this is an update from our presentation at the annual conference, because at the time we didn't know who our new president would be, or our incoming president. But Kenneth Nelson will be our 2025, starting at the conference, into 2026 president. And then again, as I mentioned, the NSGIC past president serves concurrently with the NGC president. So this just gives you a visual of that first year. The individual elected as president of NSGIC would serve as the president-elect, then they would serve their term as president. And then that third year, they would concurrently serve as past president and NGC president. And so at the end of our annual conference, Jenna stepped down in her role as NGC president, and Jonathan Duran came in as our current president. Of course, we still have our directors, and Jenna has stepped into an advisory role at this point. As far as appointments of board members, so we are currently in the process of accepting nominations for new board members, and hopefully some of you have seen those e-blasts going out. If not, this is your notice that we are now seeking additional board members. So every year, and again, this is just in our bylaws, which are pending to be approved soon. But what we have written is that NGC's board nominations will be announced during the annual meeting of NSGIC. And then nominations are going to be opened for 45 days. Appointments can be made. Right now, we have a form where you can go on the NSGIC website under the NGC page, and there's a place where you can self-nominate, you can peer nominate. Those nominations are going to be open until Sunday, November 12th. And then that's for this year. And then those that are selected will be notified by the 15th, and terms will start on January 1st of each year. So this slide just gives you a full picture of what, when we have our full board, this is what the NGC board will look like. And then currently, these are our vacancies. And so anything that is in gray and that has the check, so those are people that are already in place. Anything that is in green is highlighted as what we are currently seeking. So we are seeking one director to do a one-year term. And this is to make sure that we are kind of catching up to what our bylaws say. So our bylaws have specified we kind of want 3 on, 3 off, 3 coming in together, 3 coming off together. So we're keeping that consistency of board knowledge. And so we already had 2 directors. We need to add a 3rd, but to keep with that group that would be going off next year, we are asking that 1 person come on as a director with a 1-year term commitment. And then we have 3 directors that would be available for a 2-year term. So, and then we are also looking for a non-voting secretary role, which is an annual we can nominate that, or can be annually appointed by the NSGIC, the NGC president. If anyone is interested in the board nomination process, we do have a whole document on the NGC page that you can download. But this is just a quick snapshot. So we open the nominations. We are currently right now in the process of receiving those nominations. So you can ideally go to the Google form that is on the NGC webpage, or I know there's been some emails that have sent out where you can click the link to nominate. Or worst case scenario, you can email me at lindsay.pena@nsgic.org to make those nominations. Once nominations close on Sunday, November 12th of this year, we will confirm nominations and make sure those individuals are interested in pursuing being on the NGC board. The NGC current board will review those nominations, candidates with those skills and processes that the NGC board determines are in need will be interviewed. NGC will make their selection by December 15th. They will notify those candidates as well as the NGC, the NSGIC community, So they'll notify NSGIC and notify those candidates. And we will make announcements that will most likely come out through newsletters to the whole community. So our full board hopefully will look like this come in January 2024, with hopefully 4 new members joining us. As I've mentioned a number of times, just different resources for NGC. So if you go to the NSGIC webpage and you go under About Us, you will see a tab for National Geospatial Collaborative. So on that page, it's very, very brief right now. We will be expanding, but we have a little bit of the founding history, the board information, some of the current milestones. We do not have the bylaws currently, but as soon as they are approved and have gone through legal counsel, we will be posting our bylaws on that site for members to review. Our board nominations are up. There is an FAQ that we'll get out after this webinar that will be posted that has FAQs from all of the different meetings that we've had regarding NGC, as well as any questions that come in today will be added to that document. We also do have an ask a question function. So if after today you realize, oh man, I should have asked this question, you can always go to that page and submit a question on the form, and we'll make sure to respond to those as well as add it to our FAQ. And then any webinar resources will be posted as well. So this webinar, once it's been processed, we will put that on the page, as well as have any slide links so you can access. So with that, I am going to start any questions and answers, and I will invite the board of NGC to join me in answering questions. And if you would like to introduce yourself, I'm happy to do so. So I see, Neil, you have your hand raised. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Thanks, Lindsay. Neil McGaffey, retired from Massachusetts. I've got 3 questions. Are there circumstances under which money would flow from NSGIC to NGC or vice versa, or is that very much a firewall?
So does the board want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
You're doing a fabulous job.
I'm doing a fabulous job, so I'll do it. Okay.
Go ahead and continue.
So yeah, so there are definitely possibilities where there could be funds going from one organization to the other. What is very important, it's going to depend on the funding agency and making sure that the funding agency is aware that that is the intent and that it is in compliance with whatever the funding agency is wanting to do. Now, there are opportunities where we could have unrestricted funds, meaning that we can do whatever we want with them as an organization. Because it is a C3 organization and it is the benefit to the community, you know, while NSGIC is, again, a very important tie to us, we need to make sure that we're also including other agencies as well. And so there could be funds going to someone that is a non-NSGIC organization, and the board may want to correct me if I'm wrong, but but as a C3, again, just making sure that we are doing what is allowed by IRS, and that we are very clear in what we're doing and very transparent in what we are doing, which I think is the most important. But definitely, you know, we are here to support, and we'll be working hand in glove with NSGIC as an organization. And then potentially there could be other organizations that that aren't necessarily, again, they aren't necessarily in the NSGIC community, but maybe it could be, NGC could be the introduction to the NSGIC community if it is an organization that, you know, fits within the realm of the NSGIC membership.
I mean, I could see a scenario where the grant was large and multi-year, and as part of that, we were going to, I don't know, hire a staff person for that grant thing, but maybe that position would last long enough that it warranted having some benefits, and those maybe are available through NSGIC, but not NGC kind of thing. So the money would be passed through primarily for that purpose or that reason.
That is
okay. Well, that
yeah, no, I think that's
weeds,
definitely
anyway.
Something that NGC, I know there is, at least in the startup, of course, too, there definitely is cost sharing in terms of our current staff resources. You know, the idea is that NGC will be completely with its own budget and on this, you know, but there will be basically grant by grant terms that if it fits and it's appropriate, you know, that yes, those are things that we would definitely consider. And then obviously we're always, you know, maintaining legal counsel just in case we come to a point where we want to make sure that, you know, I'm a big compliance person for those of you that know me. And so I want to make sure that we are doing everything that is correct for whatever the funding agency is.
All right, and then I think a quickie question, and then one that's got a bit more substance. Who selects from the nominees? Man, there's a process, but who's making the decision about who's selected for the board?
So that is the decision of the current NGC board members.
Okay.
So the nominations will come through NSGIC, and it is up to the current board, which currently right now is Jonathan with voting privileges. So Jonathan, Sheila, Tim, and I think that's it with voting privileges. So they will be the ones deciding. And then ultimately, when we have a full board, it will be, you know, whoever is currently on that board making those determinations.
Okay, thank you. And then thinking back to when I was on the NSGIC board and this concept of this organization first came up, one of the things that was talked about was being able to do some advocacy, but your early slide today indicated that there's no lobbying for legislation. So what's the difference between the advocacy that NGC can do as opposed to what NSGIC can do?
Very, very minimal. I think if you have funds that you're contributing, now I'd have to look at my IRS tax legislation, but I think it's like less than 3% of what your organization is doing can be advocacy. So it is a real, you know, slim, really can't do much at all in terms of advocacy.
You're talking about for NGC? For
NGC, yes. And for NSGIC, they can do, as far as my understanding is, unlimited lobbying and advocacy.
Oh, okay. I had this idea that it was the other way around. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lindsay, we've got several questions in the chat. If you want me to, I can read those and
that'd be great.
We can sort of take them in order. So the first one was from Dan at Mass GIS. It says, as time goes on, can multiple X NGC presidents serve in the advisory role, or is that limited to a single individual at a time? So I'll take a stab at that one first. To be honest, that's not something we've even thought about. Just for initially the idea, because there is a little bit of a gap, I guess you could say, from because the NGC board president is the NSGIC past president. The NSGIC past president will roll off at the end of the annual conference, but then the new board members won't be seated until the beginning of the following year. So we're going to have this 3 to 4 month, whatever, we'll just say 3 month kind of interim in there, where we thought it would be very important to retain the institutional knowledge of the NSGIC past president / NGC president, keep them close, so to speak, and still have that institutional knowledge there as the new NGC president coming in sort of starts that job. Of course, we would anticipate also that the NSGIC president would sit in on all the NGC meetings and sort of have a year's knowledge built up anyway. But it was very important to sort of keep the outgoing NGC president in the process. So that's like I said, that's something that hasn't even come up yet. So Lindsay, any other comment about that?
I would say that is a reason why we are having these conversations with the community, and we want to hear your questions, because y'all are coming up with questions again that there's just a few of us trying to determine direction and focus for this organization, and so that is very helpful. So I will tell you, at our next NGC board meeting, we're going to take this and have that discussion, and we can definitely provide you with what the board determined moving forward.
And the second set of questions I see in the chat are from Adam DeMars. The first question says, it sounds like NGC can apply for grant opportunities to then redistribute those to various groups, regional, state, sub-state, or help facilitate the process for those groups. I think the short answer to that question is yes. And so Lindsay has far more background with grants and such than any of us do. So let me pause for a minute just to see if you want to elaborate on that one.
Yeah, and I will say that again, I would say yes. However, it's really going to be up to the current NGC board to, number one, figure out where is our focus going to be, at least to initially start. So that does not mean, we plan on the organization is going to evolve and potentially, projects could shift and whatnot. But, that initial board, which again, if people are interested in joining, because we'll still be making those decisions come January 1, is where are we going to have our projects focus, and what do we really want, this organization to be doing. And so that I would think that is a possibility if that's what the board so determines.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. And then Adam's second question, how are the nominations coming along for the other 3 directors? And actually it'll be the other 4 directors, because one of those 4 is going to serve a 1-year term. The NGC board currently meets every 2 weeks, and we just talked about this last Monday. And so I may have the number wrong, but for those 4 director positions, do we currently have, is it 6 nominations?
I believe so. We may have had one more come in, but I'd have to.
So
we definitely do have nominations coming in. So not a huge amount, but we do have some nominations coming in. And then we haven't really promoted too much at this time, but we also have talked about having an advisory committee. And so those would be non-voting members that maybe if an organization can't, or not an organization, excuse me, if an individual can't commit to the board, but has an interest and a wanting to stay engaged, that potentially they could serve in an advisory capacity as well. And so, the more that we advance that and grow that, we'll let the community know as well.
And that could also be at least a partial answer or an answer to Dan's question about a single individual at a time being in an advisory position. So there could be more. All righty. So it looks like the next couple questions were from Jill Salago-Simmel. First question was, what is the anticipated time commitment of the directors? I think the straightforward answer there is that the directors will serve 2-year terms. And I believe, I'm second guessing myself on this. I'm thinking we set those up that each one could serve 2-year terms.
Three. They could serve
Okay.
three consecutive 2-year terms.
And I couldn't remember if it was 2-year terms or 3 2-year terms.
Jonathan, I'm just going to elaborate on the question. This is Jill. I really appreciate the amount of effort that goes into setting up the NGC, and that the board so far has been meeting every 2 weeks. So really, I was thinking about that time commitment in terms of regular scheduled meetings and how frequently, and other types of activities that might be outside of the meeting time and so forth. Thank you.
And those meetings every other week, because that was set originally simply because there was a lot of startup work to be done with bylaws and getting registered in Texas and then with the IRS, and so there's been a lot of front end work to get the NGC stood up. That will be, that would be something for the NGC board to evaluate as we go forward. What the frequency of the meetings need to be, and so that hasn't necessarily. So every 2 weeks is not necessarily set in stone. Once we're fully set up and established, we may determine that every other week is we don't necessarily need to meet that often. That'll be an ongoing evaluation, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and to add to that, currently it's an hour meeting, and then I do send occasionally things for board members to review, prior to those meetings, so we can hopefully come to meetings and just make decisions. But yeah, we do have the meeting set every 2 weeks until the end of this year. And again, we do decide to evaluate. So I would, long term, I would see the board meeting at least once a month, when things are more established and set up.
And then Jill had a second question. What are the anticipated early tasks of the board, for example, strategic planning or other? And Lindsay alluded to at least one answer to this question. And the initial task of the board will be to really look out there, see, okay, what, kind of get a survey of the landscape, so to speak, see what grants are available, which grants or types of grants might, align with the mission of NGC and, for that matter, of NSGIC and its state members. And so beyond that, yes, any things that might fall under strategic planning would definitely be appropriate. And so, it's a lot of those types of things that are kind of still, I guess you'd say, falling under. So the idea of, getting NGC established and off the ground and really doing what it was intended to be doing.
And I think one of the areas, because obviously I've talked with a number of people, and especially at the conference, I had people coming up to me and saying, hey, is this a project that we could do? Which is great. And I think, probably after this meeting, we will set, up a form where if there is an idea that individuals want to share, for consideration, we are happy to receive information, obviously, from the community, because that's who we're here to support, is the geospatial community. So yes, we will get something set up to where if there are different ideas, projects, and then, I can set up meetings and we can have conversations moving forward.
I don't see any other, unless I missed one, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Hopefully I didn't miss one, maybe farther up. I think I did. Are there any other? Wait a minute, Neil's got his hand up again.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is on the website. I didn't take a quick look, but what's the deadline for the nominations?
It is September 12th, which is a Sunday.
Not September, presumably.
Not
Oh, excuse
September.
me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to go back in time. Excuse me. It is November 12th, Sunday, November 12th.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got about 2 more weeks on those.
And there will be another notification going out. I believe it's the beginning of next week as a reminder. So make sure you open those NGC newsletter things that you see coming through. Any other questions? And do any of our current other board members want to add any information or share anything?
There was Lindsay, there's one more that just popped up in the chat. Says this is Galen Scott from NOAA NGS. Would you consider helping communities get grants to make the transition to the modernized National Spatial Reference System?
I would
Well, I
throw that
suppose-
to the board.
Yeah, I suppose that could be possible. I mean, I happen to know what that is just simply because of the work of our state surveyor here in Arkansas, who's also, you know, within the GIS office. But I suppose that could be a possibility. Obviously, it would be for, you know, the board would need to consider that, and, you know, perhaps once we get the form, I don't know if you would call it a suggestion form or an idea form or whatever. That would definitely be something, once we get that form set up, that we would encourage you or anyone to add to that and submit those ideas, those recommendations or suggestions. Because just within the context of the board, we're definitely not going to know of every opportunity that's out there. So the more ideas we get, the more successful that I would anticipate that we'd be.
And if any of the current federal partners that might be on, and even business partners, you know, if you are aware, you know, think of the larger process in terms of, you know, what are the areas that would make things easier for you as an organization if you were able, you know, if you had a resource to come to, you know, what are the things that are the challenges for you, and maybe there's a way that NGC can help alleviate some of those challenges in terms of, you know, by connecting you to the people that need to apply to these particular opportunities and all that. So we're happy to have conversations. Looks like maybe one. Was there another question that came in, or?
It was a thank you.
Okay, I'm ignoring my chat, so. And of course, if anybody does have any questions after the presentation, I do have all of our contact information available. So we have the different board members as well as myself. So feel free, you know, if you'd like to have a conversation, happy to do so. If it's a more broad question, I'd love for you to go on that form, you know, and do the ask a question, because we're really using that to capture, to create our overall FAQ document.
And Lindsay, we just did have another question come into the chat. Susan Miller in Georgia asks, would being on the board exclude you from receiving grants?
That is an interesting question that the board needs to discuss and decide.
I would assume that would involve probably
Abstention.
seeking legal counsel as well,
Yeah.
just to make sure that we're not doing something we don't need to do that would, you know, disqualify someone just in case. But definitely a question to follow up on.
But that's a great question, and we appreciate that. So even the hard ones, throw them at us, because that's going to help us be a better, stronger, you know, organization from the upstart.
So Lindsay, if I could just add, a lot of work's gone into this so far, but there's still a lot of work ahead to determine what are the best sources of funding for the things that NSGIC holds dear. And that's going to be one of our major focuses going forward. So lots of work ahead, but great stuff.
And for anyone that maybe hasn't been following the chat, Emily also put into the chat the links for one for the form to submit a question to the NGC board, and also to submit a nomination for the NGC board. So those two links are in the chat. Thank you very much, Emily.
Yes, those links are also available on the NGC webpage.
Any other questions?
As Lindsay said, this is definitely not the only forum or opportunity to ask questions. If you do have other questions, please feel free, and I encourage you to send those to us, because we would much prefer to have had the opportunity to address and answer something or anything than not to.
And as far as communication moving forward, we typically regularly have an NGC update that goes into the NSGIC newsletter. NGC has also started putting out kind of its own little newsletter that will provide any updates. And then if you attend any of the leadership briefing meetings, we are on as, an initiative on the NSGIC leadership briefing. So we're monthly reporting out, but we do, and we will probably on our webpage, continue to have, regular updates as well as we progress with the organization. So we want the membership to be aware, and we will probably hold, I would say, future, meetings like this to give formal updates. But we want NSGIC membership to be involved as much as they would like to be in hearing about the organization, knowing about the organization, making those nominations, and providing their input. So if we don't have any other questions coming through the chat, I will have Jonathan, if you'd like to say any last words as our fearless president.
I would just like to again thank everyone for joining us today. We did have a lot of folks on here today. There was I think maybe around 30 from that I could see in the participant list. But we, the 501c3 is something that has been discussed within NSGIC for a few years now, and really the catalyst, I would say, to really get this moving was bringing Lindsay on, because she brought that particular knowledge or expertise of sort of that world, the grant world, so to speak. And so that's really been the catalyst to push this through as far as we've gotten it. So we're well on the way and making some exciting progress with this, and it's something that we definitely look at to to sort of from a NSGIC perspective to pay off, so to speak, in a number of ways. It's we believe it's gonna unlock a lot of things for us. And so by all means, if you have any other questions or ideas, suggestions, or whatever, please send those to us. Don't be bashful about that. But other than that, certainly appreciate your attendance today, and hope it was informative, and expect more great things to come.
Thank you all.
Thank you.